the sound.
No to
The sound in the dive.
February 14th, 1943.
12,000 feet above Guadalcanal.
The morning sun is still low, a molten orange disk rising over the Solomon Sea, and First Lieutenant Kenneth A. Walsh squints through the scratched plexiglass of his canopy. Sweat crawls down his spine despite the cool altitude. The radio crackles with static and clipped voices. Marines calling bearings, warnings, fragments of fear disguised as procedure. Below him, the jungle steams. Henderson Field is a scar cut into green wilderness, its dirt runway still damp from night rain. Beyond it, the ocean glitters like shattered glass. Then he hears it, and not over the radio, not from his engine. A whistle. Thin at first, almost imagined, then swelling into a shriek that claws through the sky. He banks instinctively. Above and behind, a dark silhouette slices through the morning light. Bent wings, long nose, a predator diving so fast it seems to bend gravity around it. For the Japanese bomber crews climbing toward the American beachhead, that sound would soon have a name.
Whistling death.
For Walsh, it is something else entirely. The aircraft screening downward is the Vought F4U Corsair, a machine born from ambition, rejected by caution, and embraced by desperation. It does not merely enter the Pacific War, it arrives like a storm, reshaping the very physics of aerial combat. But in February 1943, none of that is certain. The Corsair is still an experiment in blue paint and raw horsepower, its reputation among American pilots whispered with equal parts awe and dread. It is faster than anything they have flown. It is also unforgiving. The wrong touch on the throttle, the wrong angle on landing, and it will kill its own pilot without hesitation. Yet here, over Guadalcanal, that brutal temperament is precisely what the United States Marine Corps needs. Finishing postures. Because the sky has belonged to Japan. December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor did more than cripple battleships. It shattered illusions. American pilots who scrambled that morning faced an aircraft unlike any they had encountered. The Mitsubishi A6M0. The Zero was light as a dragonfly and just as lethal. Its turning radius defied logic. Its range allowed it to appear where no enemy fighter should be able to reach. It climbed like a hawk and dived with terrifying precision. Most dangerously of all, it was flown by men who had already survived years of combat over China. Veterans, professionals, masters of aerial dueling. American fighters, the stubby Brewster Buffalo, the rugged but slower Grumman F4F Wildcat, were outclassed in maneuverability and climb. Early engagements often ended with American aircraft spiraling into the sea, while Zeros circled overhead untouched.
In the first months of the Pacific War, Japanese pilots held what strategists call escalation dominance. They could choose when to fight, how to fight, and when to leave. The sky was theirs not just tactically, but psychologically.
The United States Navy knew it needed something revolutionary. It already existed on paper. February 1938, Washington, D.C. Inside the Bureau of Aeronautics, a specification circulates that reads less like a requirement and more like a dare. A single-seat carrier fighter capable of 350 miles per hour, a speed that brushes against the boundaries of current engineering. Most American fighters struggle to reach 300. One company answers without hesitation: Vought Aircraft Industries. Chief designer Rex Beisel does not aim to meet the requirement. He intends to exceed it violently. His solution begins with an engine that seems almost absurd in its ambition: the Pratt & Whitney or A2800 Double Wasp. 18 cylinders arranged in 2 rows, 2,000 horsepower, an engine that roars like artillery even at idle. Power, however, creates geometry problems. To absorb that horsepower, the aircraft needs a propeller over 13 feet in diameter. Mount such a propeller on a conventional fighter, and it will strike the carrier deck like a guillotine blade. Oswald Spencer becomes aviation legend, the inverted gull wing. The wing dips downward from the fuselage, then angles back up toward the tips, granting propeller clearance without requiring absurdly long landing gear. The shape is elegant, almost avian, and it gives the Corsair its unmistakable silhouette. On May 29, 1940, the prototype lifts into the air and breaks 400 miles per hour in level flight, the first American fighter ever to do so. Engineers celebrate, admirals smile. Test pilots, however, file reports written in the language of near death. The aircraft wants to roll violently on takeoff. The nose blocks forward visibility like a wall. Stall behavior is sudden and vicious. Landing gear bounce like springs. Carrier approaches become acts of faith. Between 1942 and early 1943, accidents claim more American pilots than enemy guns. Among aviators, dark humor blooms. U stands for unsafe. The Navy hesitates. The Marines do not. When the United States Navy decides the Corsair is too dangerous for carrier decks, the aircraft is handed to the United States Marine Corps, a decision born of caution that will echo through history as irony. Marines are fighting from rough island airstrips carved out of jungle mud. They are flying aircraft that cannot outrun, outclimb, or outdive the Zero. They do not see the Corsair as unsafe. They see it as salvation with sharp edges. February 13th, 1943, Henderson Field, Guadalcanal. Marine Fighting Squadron 124 receives the first operational Corsairs in the South Pacific. Pilots walk around the machines with a mixture of reverence and suspicion. The engines tick as they cool. The wings cast shadows like the spread of some mechanical bird of prey. The next morning, Valentine's Day, Japanese bombers approach. The Corsair's launch.
And the sky changes.
Walsh pushes the throttle forward, and the double Wasp answers with a roar that vibrates through his ribs. The aircraft surges upward, climbing through cloud layers that Wildcats would labor to reach. The altimeter spins. 20,000 feet arrives in minutes. Below, twin-engine Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers advance in formation, escorted by Zeros glinting in the sun. Walsh rolls inverted and dives. The airframe howls as wind tears through the wing root intakes. The sound, that terrible whistle, becomes a weapon of its own. 6.5 different caliber Browning machine guns converge on a single Zero, a 1-second burst. The Japanese fighter disintegrates, fragments scattering like sparks from a forge. The engagement lasts less than 3 minutes. 2 bombers fall. 2 Zeros burn. No Corsairs are lost. For the first time in the Pacific War, American pilots hold every tactical advantage except one, turning radius. And they simply refuse to turn. Dive, fire, climb, extend. Boom and zoom. The Zero cannot catch them. It cannot escape them. It is trapped in a geometry it was never designed to survive. Word spreads quickly among Japanese aviators. There is a new American fighter. It is painted midnight blue. It screams when it dives. They begin to listen for the whistle. Through 1943, Marine squadrons transitioned to the Corsair. Kill ratios climb to numbers once considered propaganda. 5-to-1, 8-to-1, 10-to-1. Pilots such as Walsh and the audacious Major Gregory Pappy Boyington of VMF 214, the Black Sheep Squadron, turn aggression into doctrine. Boyington baits enemy fighters into the sky, then lets the Corsair's speed turn pursuit into slaughter. The mathematics of air combat shift. Speed multiplies firepower. Climb rate multiplies survivability. Dive strength multiplies escape options. In nearly every category that matters, the Corsair dominates.
Maximum speed, over 400 miles per hour.
Dive integrity beyond 450 without structural failure. Range hours of patrol, 1,000 miles of reach.
Firepower 80 rounds per second converging into fragile aluminum.
The Zero remains agile, graceful, deadly in a turn. But agility cannot catch what refuses to be caught. By mid-1944, the sky over the Pacific is no longer contested. It is hunted. Japanese reports begin to mention the bent-wing fighter with a tone bordering on superstition. Some pilots refuse engagement. Others dive away at first sight. Veteran aviators, men who once dominated the skies over China, are dying faster than they can be replaced. Training pipelines shrink. Experience evaporates. The Corsair is not merely destroying aircraft. It is erasing generations. And yet, even as Marine squadrons rewrite the balance of power, the United States Navy watches from the decks of its carriers with restrained envy. The aircraft they deemed too dangerous is proving unstoppable from land bases. Across the ocean, another Navy takes notice. British carriers with armored decks and different landing patterns begin operating Corsairs successfully. Their curved approach techniques mitigate visibility issues. Their pilots prove the machine can be tamed at sea. The embarrassment is quiet, but profound. Engineers refine the design, raised seats, improved canopies, gentler stall characteristics. By late 1944, the U.S. Navy reverses course. The Corsair returns to the carrier fleet just as a new threat emerges from the Japanese homeland. Aircraft that do not intend to return. Kamikaze, the bent-wing fighter that once hunted Zeros, will soon intercept suicide planes diving toward American ships. Its speed and firepower becoming the last line of defense between steel hulls and explosive impact. But that is still ahead. For now, in the humid skies above the Solomon Islands, young men grip throttles and listen for the whistle, a sound that means terror to one side of the war and survival to the other. The F4U Corsair has not yet won the Pacific. The sky has begun to tilt. The Widowmaker's apprentices. March 1943. Guadalcanal, Henderson Field. The Corsairs sit in a ragged line along the pierced steel planking, midnight blue swallowed by jungle shadow. At dawn, the air smells of wet earth, spilled fuel, and scorched exhaust, the perfume of an air war fought from mud. A mechanic in grease-blackened dungarees slaps a cowling panel into place and steps back as the R2800 coughs, sputters, then catches. The engine doesn't purr, it hammers, each cylinder firing like a fist on a drumhead. The propeller wash throws dust, leaves, and loose canvas into the air, and the plane strains against its chocks as if it's already trying to escape. Nearby, a new pilot, barely out of training, flight suit hanging loose on his frame, watches the aircraft with the expression of a man who has been handed a tiger and told to ride it into battle. The old hands don't comfort him, they don't lie. They teach him the rules that keep you alive in a Corsair.
Never hit slow on approach.
Never pull hard at the stall. Never fight the torque on takeoff. Anticipate it when bet, and above all, don't try to make it behave like a wildcat. Because the Corsair is not a forgiving plane. It doesn't give warnings. It gives consequences. And the Marines are about to learn in blood and wreckage how to tame it. In the months after VMF 124's first victories, the headlines, what few reach the public, focus on the kills. The reality on Henderson Field is uglier of bent wings torn from fuselages, landing gear snapped like bones, propellers curled into the earth. Carrier decks had exposed the Corsair's cruelty. Island airstrips merely changed the nature of the danger. On the ground, the runway is longer and steadier, yes, but the margins are still razor thin, and many Marine pilots are new to high-powered fighters. They have not spent years mastering torque monsters. They've been rushed into war because the war is hungry. A Corsair on takeoff wants to roll left with violent insistence. The R2800's torque twists the airframe, and if you're not ahead of it, you'll ground loop into the trees before you ever leave the island. On landing, those stiff gear struts can rebound, throwing the aircraft back into the air. One bounce becomes two becomes a broken prop. A broken prop becomes a cartwheel becomes a funeral. The men who survive learn quickly that skill in combat starts with skill in arriving. The team self the way we had to that line ngayon hairs. It used down his system. And up They might get ahead you. But the back with his with the back with They fly patterns until dusk. They land in crosswinds. They force themselves to learn the Corsair's stall, that sudden, vicious left-wing drop pilots call the snap. They drill the recovery so many times that when it happens unexpectedly at low altitude, instinct takes over.
The Corsair pilot's first enemy is not Japan.
It is the Corsair.
Back in the United States, in hangars far from Guadalcanal, the Navy's decision to keep the aircraft off carriers hardens into policy. The Bureau of Aeronautics doesn't want the headlines that come with deck crashes and dead pilots. The Navy has other fighters, Wildcats now improved, Hellcats arriving soon, and the carrier war demands reliability above brilliance. But Marine squadrons on the front line don't have the luxury of choosing. They are watching Japanese raids still come in, still drop bombs, still try to strangle Henderson Field in its crib. Every day the airstrip stays operational is another day Marines on the ground are supplied, reinforced, and protected. And the Corsair, with all its murderous quirks, begins to prove it can make that happen. April 1943, the slot, Solomon Islands. A flight of Corsairs climbed through broken cloud cover toward a Japanese formation spotted by coast watchers. The coast watchers are a vital artery in this war, Australian and Allied observers hidden in jungle outposts, watching the sea lanes and radioing warnings that arrive minutes before bombs do. The Corsairs level off high. Their pilots scan the sky until the first glints appear, Zeros already hunting. The Japanese pilots do what they always do, try to lure the Americans into a turning fight. They bank hard, tight circles, inviting the duel that has killed so many Allied men. The Corsair pilots refuse.
We have been trained to think like predators, not duelists.
They climb above the Japanese, then dive in pairs. The maneuver is mutual support, the kind of teamwork born from fear and honed into doctrine. One Corsair attacks, the other covers. If a Zero turns to chase the attacker, the covering Corsair drops in behind it. A trap built from speed, altitude, and discipline. In American lore, it would be associated with the thack weave, a defensive tactic developed for Wildcats. In Corsairs, it becomes something more aggressive, not merely a way to survive, but a way to destroy. A Zero pilot tries to follow a Corsair into a climb. His aircraft, light and nimble, rises at first, and then, above 20,000 feet, the engine begins to gasp. The Zero's performance fades. The Corsair keeps climbing, the double Wasp still pulling like it's angry at the sky itself. With the Zero stalls, the Corsair doesn't. And in that moment, the air war becomes less about skill and more about inevitability. The Japanese pilots notice the difference immediately. They are professionals. They are not fooled by propaganda. They can feel, in the stick forces and the airflow and the distance that refuses to close, when an enemy aircraft has changed the rules. Reports filter back to Japanese commanders. A new fighter, faster in level flight, nearly untouchable in a dive, heavily armed. It does not turn with you. It attacks like a hawk and disappears like a phantom. They begin to adapt. Some Zeros try head-on passes, hoping to exploit the Corsair's long nose and limited forward visibility. Others climb to ambush positions. A few attempt coordinated attacks, multiple fighters diving together to overwhelm a single American pair before the mutual support trap can spring. Sometimes it works. A Corsair catches a burst of 7.7 millimeters or 20 millimeters fire and begins trailing smoke. A Marine pilot feels the aircraft shudder as a round punches through cowling metal. He looks down and sees the jungle rushing upward, too close, too fast. But more often, the Corsair's rugged construction keeps it flying. Its airframe can take punishment that would tear a Zero apart. Its engine can run damaged, cylinders still firing even when one bank is coughing blood and oil. A Corsair can limp home to Henderson Field with holes in its wings you could put a fist through. And when it lands, mechanics patch it up and send it back out again because the island war is fought not only by pilots but by men on the ground who never get medals, only exhaustion. May 1943. Kenneth Walsh is no longer a name on a squadron roster. He is becoming a problem the Japanese can't solve. His kill count climbs. He learns to exploit the Corsair's strengths with ruthless precision. He doesn't chase, he doesn't get drawn low. He keeps altitude like a bank account, spending it only when the return is certain. He attacks from above, fires short bursts, 1 second, sometimes less, and breaks away before a Zero can even begin the turn. In the ready room, the tone shifts. The Corsair stops being a wild beast and starts being a weapon the pilots trust. They still respect it like you respect a loaded rifle, but the fear changes shape. It becomes sharper, more controlled. A Marine pilot can be terrified and still fly well. What breaks him is confusion, not fear. The Corsair teaches clarity through pain. While the Marines grind down Japanese air power over the Solomons, another transformation is happening farther north and east. A massive industrial and training machine ramping up in the United States. Carriers are being built. Aircraft factories are running day and night. Training pipelines are expanding. The war becomes more and more a contest of systems. Japan's pre-war pilot training created elite aviators, hundreds of hours, years of refinement, a culture that prized mastery. But that system is slow, fragile, and designed for a short war won by superior quality. America's system is different, brutal in its own way. It turns out pilots by the thousands. They may have fewer hours, less polish, but they have numbers, and they have machines like the Corsair that can help close the skill gap. And that is the nightmare for Japan. Not just that the Corsair is better, but that America can build and crew it in quantities Japan cannot match. By late 1943, Japanese commanders begin to realize they are bleeding something they cannot replace. Veteran pilots. They can replace planes, at least for a while. They can replace fuel, barely. But they cannot replace years. Every time a Corsair's guns shred a Zero, it is not merely aluminum burning. It is experience dying. August 1943, Espiritu Santo. A man steps onto the airstrip with the swagger of someone who has already survived too much. Major Gregory Pappy Boynton. Stocky, hard-eyed, cigarette smoke and reputation trailing behind him like exhaust. He is a veteran of China, flying Tiger's combat, and he carries himself like a brawler who has somehow been handed wings. He takes command of VMF 214, a squadron that will soon earn a name that sounds like a joke. Until you see what it does in combat.
Wait here.
The black sheep.
Boynton looks at the Corsair and sees not an aircraft, but an opportunity to wage psychological war. He understands something that pure tacticians sometimes miss. Air combat is not only physics. It is morale. It is fear. So he fights like a man who wants the enemy to remember him. He flies low over Japanese airfields, daring pilots to scramble. When they do, his Corsairs are already above, diving out of the sun. The whistle arrives first, then the bullets, then the fire.
Zeros burn on the runway.
Zeros burn in the climb. Zeros burn in the turn that doesn't matter anymore. By the end of 1943, the Japanese still have carriers. They still have aircraft. They still have pilots.
Without the situation of being involved, have confidence.
And confidence in air war is often the difference between attack and hesitation, between survival and death. The Corsair's story is no longer just Guadalcanal. It is becoming the wider Pacific. It is moving with the front line as islands fall, airstrips are carved out, and Japanese airfields become targets instead of threats. The next phase will take the Corsair into a new kind of mission: deep sweeps, escort, strafing runs on enemy airfields, the systematic destruction of air power on the ground. And as 1944 approaches, the stakes escalate again. Because soon, the Corsair will face not only Zeros and bombers, but an enemy strategy that doesn't care about survival at all and cannot be deterred. Kamikaze tactics will demand a new kind of killing. Fast, immediate, absolute. And the Navy watching all of this will have to make a choice it has avoided for too long. Bring the Corsair back to the carrier decks. Or watch someone else win the war with the plane they were too afraid to trust. The bent wings return to sea. April 1944. Eastern Atlantic. Aboard HMS Victorious. The deck heaves beneath Lieutenant Norman Hanson's boots as the carrier slices through gray swells. Wind lashes across the flight deck in cold, salty sheets, rattling loose canvas and snapping signal flags like rifle cracks. The sea is steel. The sky is lower still, a ceiling of cloud pressing down on men and machines alike. Ahead of him, chained to the deck with wheel chocks and thick ropes, sits a fighter that American admirals once deemed too dangerous for carrier duty. Bent wings folded, canopy open, engine ticking as it cools. The Vought F4U Corsair looks enormous compared to the British deck crew scurrying beneath it. Hanson climbs the ladder and drops into the cockpit, gloved hands brushing familiar switches. He has heard the rumors, the bounce, the blind nose, the savage stall, but he has also heard something else from pilots who've flown it in the Pacific.
Nothing climbs like it, nothing dives like it, nothing hits like it.
The deck officer signals, chocks away. The Corsair lunges forward, tail lifting, propeller biting the air like a circular saw. For a split second, the nose blocks everything ahead, only sky and engine cowling. Then the aircraft breaks free of the deck and the ocean drops away beneath him. It is the first of many British launches that will quietly overturn an American assumption.
The plane can land on carriers.
If you learn how. While Marine squadrons hammer Japanese air power from island runways, the British Royal Navy Fleet Air Arm begins proving that the Corsair's reputation as a deck killer is not destiny, but discipline. British carriers are built differently. Armored decks, shorter landing areas, different arresting gear geometry. Their pilots also adopt a curved, sweeping approach pattern instead of the straight-in descent favored by U.S. Navy doctrine. The curve changes everything. By approaching in a continuous turn, the pilot keeps the deck in sight rather than losing it behind the Corsair's long nose. Visibility improves, timing improves, landings, once a gamble, become a skill.
Back at American briefing rooms, reports arrive with an uncomfortable implication. The aircraft the Navy rejected is being used successfully by an ally.
And meanwhile, engineers at Vought Aircraft Industries have not been idle. The F4U-1A introduces subtle but crucial refinements, a raised seat that lifts the pilot's eye line, a bulged canopy that widens peripheral vision, stall strips and spoilers that tame the vicious wing drop. The Corsair is not becoming gentle. It is becoming manageable. By late 1944, the United States Navy reverses its stance. Squadrons that once eyed the aircraft with suspicion now line their decks with its midnight blue wings, and they arrive just in time for a threat unlike any fighter duel. October 1940. Radar operators aboard American carriers watch their scopes bloom with inbound contacts. Not formations maneuvering, not patrols weaving, straight lines, direct vectors, too direct. The word passes from headset to headset, from ready rooms to cockpits. Aircraft loaded with explosives, flown by minimally trained pilots who do not intend to land. Traditional dogfighting logic collapses in the face of someone who does not fear death. You cannot bluff him, you cannot chase him off. You can only stop him completely before he reaches the fleet.
Corsairs launch in waves.
Their speed becomes range. Their climb becomes altitude advantage. Their 6-point Vupsapiku caliber Brownings become surgical instruments of destruction. A kamikaze aircraft must be shattered, not merely damaged. A smoking engine is not enough. A wounded pilot is irrelevant. The airplane must cease to exist.
In this grim arithmetic, the Corsair excels.
Pilots dive through flak bursts and tracer fire, closing at blistering speeds. A single pass, a burst of 80 rounds in 1 second, and the incoming plane disintegrates, fragments tumbling harmlessly into the sea instead of into a ship's superstructure. During the Okinawa campaign, thousands of suicide sorties are launched. Fighter interception destroys the majority before impact. Among those fighters, Corsair squadrons become synonymous with last-ditch salvation, bent wings appearing at the horizon, whistles rising into shrieks, then silence where an explosion might have been. The Corsair has shifted roles again.
From hunter of aces to guardian of fleets.
But the story of 1944 is not only defense, it is also annihilation, not of ships, but of an air arm's ability to exist. June 1944. The skies over the Marianas erupt into what American pilots will later nickname the Battle of the Philippine Sea, a 2-day engagement so lopsided that it becomes known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Hundreds of Japanese aircraft rise to challenge American carrier groups. Many never return. Corsairs now operate alongside newer fighters, but their presence is unmistakable. Heavy silhouettes diving through sunlit cloud layers, guns flashing, engines roaring like thunder trapped in metal cylinders. Japanese formations break apart under coordinated attacks. Pilots who once dominated the Pacific now face opponents with superior speed, altitude control, and overwhelming numbers. The loss is not merely tactical. It is generational. Every experienced aviator shot down as a library of skill burned to ash. Every replacement pilot entering combat with only a fraction of that training is a gamble already stacked against him. American production lines deliver aircraft by the thousands. Training schools graduate pilots in waves. Japan cannot match the tempo. Fuel shortages reduce flight hours. Instructors are pulled into combat because there is no one else. The Corsair is not the sole cause of this collapse, but it is one of the instruments that makes the collapse irreversible. By early 1945, Corsairs are ranging far beyond the island chains that once defined the front line. Fighter sweeps push deep into enemy territory. Airfields that once launched raids are now targets themselves. Pilots strafe parked aircraft, fuel dumps, and maintenance sheds, destroying Japanese air power before it ever leaves the ground. For the celebrated B-17, engineered by the Boeing Corporation. Interrogations of captured airmen reveal a recurring theme. The bent-wing fighter is faster, stronger, and hits harder. The only advantage the Zero retains, maneuverability, is neutralized by American tactics that simply refuse the turning duel. Some Japanese squadrons delay launch if Corsairs are reported overhead. Not cowardice calculation, but calculation yields a strategic consequence. The sky is surrendered without engagement. By mid-1945, American carrier task forces operate close to the Japanese home islands with increasing impunity. Daylight bomber formations stretch across the horizon. Interception becomes rare, not because aircraft are absent, but because sending inexperienced pilots against seasoned Corsair flyers is tantamount to deliberate sacrifice. The air above Japan grows strangely quiet.
And yet, amid the sweeping statistics and the thunder of engines, the war is still experienced cockpit by cockpit, heartbeat by heartbeat.
A young Navy pilot lining up on a carrier deck feels the Corsair's nose obscure the landing signal officer for a breathless second. Then the deck reappears as he executes the curved approach perfected by British counterparts. The hook catches. The aircraft slams to a halt. He exhales only when the engine winds down.
A Marine pilot diving on a radar contact feels the airframe begin to sing.
That eerie whistle rising through the wing roots, and knows the sound that terrifies the enemy is also his own momentum screening through aluminum skin. A mechanic, wiping oil from his hands, looks at a returning Corsair, riddled with holes, and marvels that it is still flying at all. The Corsair is no longer merely an experimental brute or a marine desperation gamble. It is now a carrier fighter, a fleet defender, a ground attacker, and an executioner of obsolete tactics. It has become adaptable without losing its ferocity, a rare trait in any weapon, rarer still in one born from compromise. But even as its wings touch more decks and its guns silence more engines, another transformation waits beyond the war itself. The propeller age is ending. Jets are already carving white scars across the sky, faster than any piston engine can hope to be. The Corsair's supremacy as a dogfighter will soon give way to a different battlefield, lower, slower, closer to the ground, where durability and endurance matter more than altitude records.
For now, however, in the final year of the Pacific War, the bent-wing fighter remains exactly what its enemies named it.
A sound in the dive. A shadow over the sun. A whistle that means you have already been chosen. July 3rd, 1950. Busan, Korea. The mountains rise like broken teeth from the mist, jagged silhouettes against a pale morning sky. Below them, columns of smoke twist upward from burning villages, black ribbons against green valleys. On the ground, Marines dig into shallow foxholes, rifles muddy, faces gray with exhaustion. They look up when they hear it. Not the whistle of a dive this time. A deeper sound, a rolling thunder that seems to come from inside the clouds themselves. Two bent-wing fighters burst from the haze, propellers silting the air, sunlight flashing off their canopies. Their silhouettes are unmistakable even a decade after their first combat debut.
Javant, F4U Corsair is back at war.
With the celebrated B-17, engineered by the Boeing Corporation. With the sky it returns to, is not the sky it once ruled. World War II ends in August 1945, with cities in ruins and airfields silent. Across the globe, propeller-driven fighters, once the apex of engineering, begin to look antiquated beside the sleek new machines powered by jet turbines. Speeds climb past 500 miles per hour. Climb rates double. The future hums with a higher-pitched note. Many piston fighters are retired almost immediately, scrapped, sold, parked in museums where children will one day stare at them as relics of a vanished era. The Corsair refuses to disappear.
Its story, instead of ending, bends again.
Korea is not the Pacific. The war that erupts in June 1950 is fought over mountains, valleys, and narrow supply roads rather than vast oceans. The enemy in the sky is no longer the nimble Zero, but the silver dart of the Mikoyan-Gurevich MiG-15, a jet capable of climbing faster than any propeller fighter could dream of matching. The Corsair cannot chase jets into the stratosphere. It cannot duel them at altitude. What it can do is something jets struggle with. Stay low. Stay slow.
Stay on the battlefield for hours. Variants such as the F4U-5 and the heavily armored AU-1 transform the once pure air superiority fighter into a flying artillery piece.
Bomb racks bloom beneath the wings. Rocket rails line the fuselage. Napalm tanks hang like ominous pendulums. Marine pilots roll into valleys where rifle fire snaps against their wings. They circle above trapped infantry units, engines droning steadily while jets roar overhead and vanish. When ground troops call for support, Corsairs answer within minutes, diving through mountain air thick with smoke and dust. The bent-wing fighter that once shredded Zeros now tears apart supply, convoys, bunkers, and artillery positions. It is no longer the hunter of skies.
It is the guardian of men on the ground.
The transition is not merely mechanical, it is emotional. Pilots who once measured success in aerial victories now measure it in the relief heard over the radio. A platoon saved, a road reopened, a ridge cleared. The Corsair's rugged airframe absorbs punishment that would cripple lighter jets. Bullet holes pepper its wings. Oil streaks its fuselage. It returns again and again. The war becomes intimate. At treetop height, the pilot can see faces, he can see uniforms, movements, the flash of muzzle fire. He can smell cordite when he pulls up from a rocket run. The distance that once separated air combat from the battlefield collapses into seconds and meters. And the Corsair proves that a machine designed for one war can, in the right hands, redefine itself for another. When the Korean conflict cools and armistice lines replace front lines, the Corsair does not retire, it migrates. Nations rebuilding their air forces find value in an aircraft that is powerful, durable, and still lethal. France flies Corsairs over the jungles of Indochina, where humidity clings to metal and visibility shrinks to tunnels of green. The aircraft's range and payload make it ideal for rugged terrain where jet infrastructure is impractical. In Southeast Asia, the Corsair's shadow passes over rivers, rice paddies, and colonial outposts. It becomes a symbol not just of American air power, but of a generation of piston engine fighters refusing obsolescence through sheer adaptability. South Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia inherit airframes and maintenance crews who know how to keep the double wasp breathing. In Central America, Honduras and El Salvador acquire Corsairs that will one day fight a war, so brief it will seem surreal to historians. July 1969, Central America, with purpose. The world watches astronauts step onto the moon, humanity touching another celestial body. While thousands of miles away, two small nations clash in a conflict that lasts barely 100 hours. The football war, sparked by political tensions and ignited by a soccer match, becomes the stage for a strange historical footnote. Bent-wing Corsairs and sleek North American P-51 Mustang fighters engage in dogfights that could have been filmed in 1944. The sky over Central America fills with piston engine thunder, while the space age unfolds overhead in radio broadcasts. It is the last time in history that propeller-driven fighters will duel each other in open combat. When Honduras retires its final Corsair later that year, the aircraft's combat career closes after more than a quarter century, one of the longest spans of any fighter ever built. Yet retirement does not mean silence. Air shows across the world keep the Corsair alive in sound and motion. Restored airframes gleam under polished paint. Midnight navy blue, tricolor camouflage, British roundels, each scheme a memory made visible. When a pilot pushes the throttle forward and the R2800 roars, spectators feel the vibration in their chests. Then the aircraft dives, and the whistle returns. Children who have never heard a gun fired in anger still flinch at the shriek slicing through the sky. Veterans close their eyes and are transported back decades to humid islands, rolling decks, mountain valleys. The sound is mechanical, yes, but also emotional. It carries the weight of every sortie flown and every life changed beneath those bent wings. Behind the statistics, thousands of sorties, thousands of enemy aircraft destroyed, endless columns of missions, logged in ink and oil, are men who were barely adults when they climbed into the cockpit. They remember the Corsair, not as legend, but as sensation.
The kick of torque on takeoff.
The smell of hot oil. The way the horizon tilted when you rolled into a dive. The moment the whistle began, and you knew gravity was now your ally. For some, it was the best aircraft they ever flew. For others, it was the most terrifying. Both truths can live in the same machine.
Military historians debate turning points in wars, battles, strategies, decisions etched into textbooks. The Corsair's impact is harder to isolate because it is not confined to a single date or engagement. It is a continuum, from the desperate runways of Guadalcanal to the armored decks of British carriers, from kamikaze interceptions to Korean valleys, from colonial jungles to the surreal dogfights of 1969.
Its legacy is not merely that it won battles. It is that it adapted and outlived expectations. It outflew obsolescence.
It outlasted the war that created it.
And when the last operational Corsair finally shut down its engine for the final time, the silence that followed was not emptiness. It was completion. A bent-wing fighter had entered history not as a footnote, but as an echo, a sound that began as terror, became salvation, and ended as memory.